Belgium, late January 1945. Snow falling sideways in the wind. A farmhouse on the edge of a village called Holtzheim, its walls pocked with fresh bullet scars. 4 American soldiers kneel in the yard, hands laced behind their helmets. Around them stand nearly 90 German soldiers. Some are holding rifles. Others are still bending down, pulling weapons from a pile in the snow. 20 minutes earlier, these men had been prisoners of war. Now they are not. A first sergeant named Leonard Funk walks around the corner of that farmhouse, expecting to check on 4 guards and a quiet stack of captured Germans. Instead, he walks straight into the reversal of everything his company had fought that morning to achieve. A German officer steps forward. He shoves the muzzle of a machine pistol into Funk's stomach and starts shouting orders in a language Funk does not speak. By every rule of survival, this is the moment a soldier raises his hands. The math says surrender. Funk is one of 2 Americans still standing free. The rest of his company is scattered through the village, fighting a different battle. There is no reinforcement coming around that corner. There is no clever exit written into the terrain. Leonard Funk starts laughing. Not a nervous chuckle, not a smile to ease the tension. According to the men who were there, it was open, unmistakable laughter, aimed at a furious officer holding a loaded weapon against his ribs. We are going to tell you exactly what happened in the 60 seconds that followed, and how a war record built years earlier explains why a 5'5" clerk from a Pennsylvania steel town was the one man in that yard who did not freeze. But first, you need to understand who Leonard Funk was before the war ever gave him a rifle. Leonard Alfred Funk, Jr. was born in 1916 in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, a cluster of steel mills and row houses on the smoke-stained banks of the Monongahela River, a few miles outside Pittsburgh. It was not a soft place to grow up. Furnaces lit the night sky orange. Men worked with their hands, or they did not work at all. Funk graduated high school in 1934 in the grinding middle years of the Great Depression and went straight to work as a clerk. There was no money for college, no clear path upward, just the daily discipline of showing up and doing the job in front of him. Friends, and later fellow soldiers, would describe him the same way. Quiet, steady, unassuming. He stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed around 140 pounds. Nothing about his appearance suggested the man who would one day stare down 90 armed soldiers and laugh. In June of 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, Funk was drafted into the United States Army. Most draftees in that stretch of history had no idea a world war was about to consume the next 4 years of their lives. Funk trained, waited, and watched the war grow larger around him. Then, in 1942, after the United States had fully entered the fight, he made a choice that set him apart from the men who simply waited for orders. He volunteered for the paratroopers. At the time, American airborne forces were a new and unproven idea. Volunteers were asked to jump out of aircraft into contested ground, land scattered and alone in the dark, and fight their way toward an objective before the enemy could organize against them. The training built for that kind of war was deliberately brutal. Long marches under full combat loads, repetition until muscle memory replaced hesitation, jump towers that taught the body to trust a parachute before the mind ever had time to argue with it. Then the real aircraft, the C-47s, and the walk to an open door with nothing beneath you but darkness and enemy territory. Airborne doctrine assumed chaos from the first second on the ground. Units would be scattered. Radios would fail. A soldier might land alone, miles from his objective, surrounded by an enemy he could not yet see. The training was built around a single hard lesson. Panic kills faster than bullets. A man who could think clearly in confusion had a chance, A man who could not, usually did not come home. Funk absorbed that lesson completely. But training is a rehearsal. Normandy would be the real performance, and it would ask more of him than any exercise ever had. On the night of June 5th into June 6th, 1944, Funk jumped into Normandy with the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, part of the 82nd Airborne Division. The drop was a disaster of the kind that airborne planners had feared and half expected. Low cloud cover, heavy anti-aircraft fire, and pilots forced into evasive maneuvers scattered paratroopers across miles of unfamiliar French countryside, far from their intended landing zones. Some men came down in flooded fields and drowned under the weight of their own equipment before they could cut free. Others landed inside German positions and never had a chance to fight back. Funk came down with a badly sprained ankle in territory he did not recognize, separated from his unit's objective. He did not wait for the situation to improve on its own. He began gathering other lost paratroopers, 18 of them in total, and set a course he believed would lead the group back to friendly lines. For the better part of 10 days, limping on that injured ankle, Funk led the group across roughly 20 miles of enemy-held ground. When scouts sent ahead were lost, he moved into the lead himself rather than risk another man in that position. Every soldier in that group made it back alive. For this, Funk earned the Silver Star. Normandy proved that Leonard Funk could survive being lost behind enemy lines, alone, injured, and responsible for other men's lives. Operation Market Garden, that September, would prove something different. It would prove what he did when the odds themselves made no sense at all. In mid-September of 1944, the Allies launched Operation Market Garden, a bold and ultimately unsuccessful plan to seize a chain of bridges through the Netherlands using airborne troops dropped far ahead of the advancing ground army. Success depended on getting thousands of paratroopers and towed gliders onto the ground in one piece, which meant German anti-aircraft positions were among the most dangerous threats of the entire operation. Near a Dutch position close to the drop zones, Funk spotted a German flak battery, 3 20mm anti-aircraft guns, actively firing on incoming American gliders as they descended. He did not wait for orders or reinforcements. With just 2 other men, he led a direct assault on the gun crews, fighting through the security around the position and silencing all 3 guns. The action likely saved American lives still in the air when it happened. For this, Funk received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor in the United States Army. By the winter of 1944, Leonard Funk had already proven he was not reckless. Reckless men do not survive 2 campaigns making decisions like these. He was decisive, and decisive men are dangerous in exactly the moments when everyone else hesitates. The Battle of the Bulge would test that decisiveness under conditions worse than anything he had faced before, and it would leave him with a resolve that shaped everything that followed. In mid-December of 1944, Germany launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest, catching Allied lines off guard and driving deep into Belgium and Luxembourg in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. It was fought in brutal winter conditions, deep snow, temperatures well below freezing, and a fog of confusion in which entire units lost contact with each other for days at a time. Early in that offensive, near the Belgian crossroads of Bonnier, close to the town of Malmedy, soldiers from a German armored unit murdered roughly 80 American prisoners of war who had already surrendered. News of the massacre spread through American ranks within days, and it changed something in how soldiers across the front thought about the act of surrender. It was no longer an automatic guarantee of safety. For many American troops, the idea that laying down a weapon meant survival had been badly shaken. For Leonard Funk, that knowledge did not fade with the passing weeks. It hardened into something closer to a decision. Whatever happened next, in whatever house or field or farmyard the war put in front of him, surrender was no longer the safe, sensible option it might once have seemed. That decision would matter more than he could have known on the afternoon of January 29th, 1945, when he walked into a trap that had already swallowed his own men. By late January, the German offensive in the Ardennes had been broken, and Allied forces were pushing the front back toward Germany, clearing villages the enemy had briefly held. Company C of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment received orders to take the small Belgian village of Holtzheim. On paper, this was a straightforward objective. In practice, the company was under strength, worn down by weeks of winter fighting, and short on the kind of manpower an infantry assault usually required. The company advanced 15 miles through a driving snowstorm, wading at times through drifts that reached their waists. Partway through the operation, the company's executive officer became a casualty, and First Sergeant Funk stepped into those duties without hesitation. Still short on riflemen, he pulled together clerks, cooks, and other headquarters personnel, men whose usual war was fought with paperwork and mess kits, and turned them into a combat unit on the spot. Under artillery fire and harassing fire from the flank, this improvised force, alongside the company's 3rd platoon, cleared 15 houses in the village without suffering a single casualty, taking 30 German prisoners in the process. Another American unit operating nearby captured 50 more. Combined, Company C now held roughly 80 German prisoners, and Holtzheim belonged, for the moment, to the Americans. But the company had almost nothing left to spare. Only 4 soldiers could be assigned to guard 80 prisoners, while the rest of the unit fanned out to mop up pockets of resistance still scattered through the village. The math of that decision was uncomfortable even at the time. 4 men, 80 prisoners, and a fight that was not yet finished. For a short while, it seemed to hold. Then a German patrol arrived, wearing white winter camouflage that blended into the same drifts the Americans had just fought through, and the situation in that farmyard changed completely. Moving quickly and using the confusion of the storm to their advantage, the German patrol overwhelmed the 4 American guards before they could raise an alarm. In moments, the roughly 80 German prisoners were no longer prisoners. Weapons that had been stacked and secured were back in their hands. What had been a captured, disarmed group was now reorganizing into something close to a company-sized force of its own, with a single, dangerous purpose taking shape: strike Company C from the rear, while the Americans were still spread thin through the village, still believing the fight for Holtzheim was essentially won. If that attack landed, it could unravel everything the company had just paid for in blood and frozen fingers. And the one American who had the clearest picture of just how dangerous that farmyard had become was about to walk straight into the middle of it, with no idea what was waiting on the other side of the wall. Funk and another soldier had gone back to check on the guards and the prisoners, believing, based on movement they had seen, that reinforcements might already be in position to help. Because of that assumption, Funk had slung his Thompson submachine gun over his shoulder, rather than carrying it ready to fire. It was a small, human detail, the kind of momentary relaxation that combat punishes without warning. He rounded the corner of the farmhouse and stopped. The 4 guards he expected to find on watch were instead kneeling in the snow, hands on their helmets. In front of him stood a mass of armed and half-armed German soldiers, more than 80 of them, some still scrambling to recover weapons from the ground. A German officer moved toward him immediately, closing the distance before Funk had time to fully process what he was looking at. The officer jammed the muzzle of a machine pistol into Funk's stomach and began shouting orders, fast and furious, in German. Funk did not speak German. He had no idea what the officer wanted beyond the obvious. Surrender, drop the weapon, kneel with the others. Every visible fact in that yard argued for compliance. He was outnumbered by roughly 90 to 1, if the freed prisoners and the German patrol that had freed them are counted together. His own men were disarmed. There was no cover to dive for and no help within shouting distance. A rational calculation, made in the space of a single breath, offered exactly one survivable move: comply, kneel, and hope. Leonard Funk started laughing. Nobody who was there, and no account passed down since, has ever fully explained why. Maybe it was pure nervous reflex, the body's strange response to a threat too large to process calmly. Maybe it was the simple, absurd helplessness of being screamed at in a language he could not understand, at the worst possible moment to find anything funny. Maybe some instinct told him that a totally unexpected reaction might buy him half a second the officer wasn't prepared for. We may never know which of these is true, or whether it was some combination of all three. What we do know is what that laughter did to the man holding the gun. The German officer's shouting grew louder and angrier. His face reddened. He was losing control of the one thing an armed man facing a laughing, unarmed-looking prisoner should never lose: the rhythm of the moment. Funk's laughter had turned a scripted surrender into something the officer had no procedure for. Slowly, almost lazily, Funk began to unsling the Thompson from his shoulder. To the officer, and to the Germans around him, it looked exactly like what they expected: a prisoner giving up his weapon. It was not. In one motion, Funk brought the muzzle of the Thompson into line and fired directly into the officer in front of him. The burst that killed the officer also broke the spell, holding the entire yard in place. Funk turned the weapon toward the nearest armed Germans and kept firing, shouting at the same time for the 4 disarmed American guards to grab any weapon they could reach off the ground. What followed was less a battle than a violent scramble, fought at close range in trampled snow, smoke, and shouted commands in 2 languages. The 4 Americans, suddenly armed again, joined the fight within seconds. Some Germans returned fire. Others, watching their officer go down and their formation collapse in an instant, threw down what they were holding and raised their hands. In under a minute, the entire situation had inverted itself for the second time that day. Funk had not overpowered 90 men through sheer force. Nobody could have. What he had done was recognize and seize the single narrow moment when those 90 men were not yet acting as one force, when their command had just been shattered and their confidence had not yet reorganized around a new leader. That window lasted seconds. He used every one of them. By the time the shooting stopped, 21 German soldiers were dead, many more were wounded, and the rest had surrendered again, this time for good. Company C secured Holtzheim fully, and the prisoners, once again prisoners, were marched off under a far heavier guard than 4 men this time. The attack that could have hit Company C from the rear never happened. The company's position held. In the following months, word of what had happened in that farmyard traveled up the chain of command, and Leonard Funk's actions were formally recognized with the Medal of Honor, the United States military's highest award for valor. It was presented to him at a White House ceremony in the late summer of 1945. It is worth being precise about what that medal represents. Funk did not single-handedly defeat 90 men. He created one small opening in an impossible situation, and in that opening, 4 other Americans found their weapons and their nerve at exactly the same moment he needed them to. That kind of courage, the kind that includes other people rather than replacing them, is the whole point of the story. It does not need exaggeration. Holtzheim was not a lucky accident stitched onto an otherwise ordinary war record. By the time it happened, Leonard Funk had already survived a night jump into Normandy that scattered his unit for miles, led 18 lost men across 20 miles of enemy territory on an injured ankle, and personally led an assault on an anti-aircraft position during Operation Market Garden that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. Add the Medal of Honor from Holtzheim, along with the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and decorations from the French, Belgian, and Dutch governments, and a picture emerges of one of the most decorated American paratroopers of the entire Second World War. Holtzheim was not the exception in that record, It was the final, most extreme proof of a pattern that had been building since the moment he stepped out of a C-47 over Normandy. A man who did not panic when the situation collapsed around him, and who used the seconds everyone else lost to hesitation. After the war ended, Leonard Funk did not chase the spotlight his medal could easily have given him. He left the Army, returned to Western Pennsylvania, and went to work for the Veterans Administration in the Pittsburgh region, helping other former soldiers navigate benefits, paperwork, and the long, unglamorous process of rebuilding a life after combat. He stayed with that work for roughly 3 decades, eventually rising to lead the regional office before retiring in the early 1970s. He married his wife, Gertrude, and they raised 2 daughters together in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, not far from the steel town streets where he had grown up. Those who knew him in these years describe a man who rarely brought up the war unless asked directly, and who treated the people around him, officers and privates alike, with the same steady, unassuming respect he had shown his own men in that farmyard in Belgium. Leonard Funk died in November of 1992 at the age of 76 after a battle with cancer. At the time of his death, he was the last living Medal of Honor recipient from the 82nd Airborne Division to have earned that honor during the Second World War. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, among thousands of others who served. The man who laughed into the muzzle of a German machine pistol spent nearly 30 years afterward, sitting at a desk, helping other veterans fill out forms. There is no contradiction in that. It may be the truest measure of who he actually was. So what does the story of Leonard Funk actually teach us about courage? It is not size. Funk stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and was outweighed by nearly every man in that farmyard. It is not volume, and it is not the absence of fear. Nobody facing a loaded weapon at point-blank range, surrounded by dozens of armed men, is free of fear in that instant. What courage seems to be, at least in this one true story from a snowy village in Belgium, is the ability to keep thinking, keep looking for an opening, in the exact moment when every rational voice says the situation is already over. At Holtzheim, Leonard Funk had no good option in front of him. Every path led somewhere close to death or captivity. So he made one that did not officially exist yet, in the space of a laugh and a single unslung weapon, and 4 other Americans found the same courage in the seconds right behind him. If you want more true World War II stories told through careful research and real documentary storytelling, subscribe to WARFRONT Files.